We are one people, but a people welded from many nations and races. People who came to America during a vast migration from Europe to other parts of the world. In this migration, millions of Europeans left their homelands to settle in new countries across the seas. Almost 2/3 of them came to the United States. When we became a nation, our population numbered just under 4 million. Each symbol here represents 500,000 people. Most of our people were of British origin, but there were also Dutch and many Germans, as well as French, Spanish, a great many Negroes, and others. The era of the Great Migration from Europe began about 1820. During the following 70 years, immigrants came from Western and Northern Europe in growing numbers. The earliest waves brought people from Ireland and Great Britain, from Germany and nearby countries. Later, the Scandinavians joined the migration from the north and west of Europe. Then, in the 80s, from the south and east they came as the migration fever spread deeper into Europe. The flow of immigration reached its peak between 1891 and 1920. During these years, a tremendous movement set in from the countries of southern and eastern Europe. Many still came from the north and west, but many more came from Austria-Hungary, Poland, Russia, Italy, and the Balkan Peninsula. But what of the people behind these symbols? What were their motives and hopes? Let us turn back to a steamship agent's office in a European port a half-century ago. Most of those seeking passage to America are farmers and peasants, like this family from Eastern Europe. Behind them lie years of labor on land that could never be theirs. A man grows discontented when his own labors and the labors of his family go mainly to enrich a landlord. For peasants like these, there is hope of a better life in America across the sea. And there are those who have known at firsthand the political oppression of autocratic governments. Governments that deal swiftly and ruthlessly with those who dare to champion political liberty and freedom of expression. To the man deprived of civil rights in his native land, America offers the hope of freedom. And then there are families like this, who have suffered a religious persecution that could drive them from their homes and scorn their right to worship in their own manner. For such as these, there is the promise of religious freedom in immigration to America. These and millions of others like them make up the Great Migration. Millions of every nation and calling, drawn together by their vision of America, a vision of land, opportunity, and freedom. These face the long ocean voyage. Then, immigration gateways like Ellis Island and examination immigration officials. Here, at the turn of the century, almost all Europeans enter freely, except undesirables such as criminals. For all mules, there is a medical examination to weed out those with serious illnesses and dangerous diseases. Many are rejected. Once in the new land, what lies ahead? These groups of Europeans that before 1890 spread rapidly westward to settle both on the farms and in the cities. By the year 1900, settlements of Germans were scattered widely from east to west. Scandinavians were grouped in the northern Middle West, and the Irish were largely concentrated in the northeast. Today, the sons of these immigrants still cultivate the soil that their fathers made their own. And the farming communities and cities founded by these groups are typically American. Here, there is little trace of the old world, though we find these communities still peopled by the children of these immigrants. Most of the immigrants that came after 1890 went into the factories and found their homes in the tenements of America's growing cities. The crowded slums became America's melting pot. Sprawling communities of transplanted peoples living side by side, but still diverse in languages and customs, as diverse as these shop signs that mark the immigrant neighborhoods. These communities posed an urgent question to America. Could these people of many nations become a part of the American way of life? In meeting this problem, many agencies played a part. The churches that preserved traditional ties in the midst of new surroundings. The newspapers that spoke to the immigrants in languages they knew. The trade unions that taught them to work together. These and other agencies drew into the larger community the stream of new arrivals. In 1924, a law was passed to restrict immigration from countries outside the Western Hemisphere. By this law, the number to be admitted henceforth was to be in proportion to the national origins of our country's population. This gave to Northern and Western Europe more than 80% of the total, while Southern and Eastern Europe received less than 20%. After 1924, immigration from Europe dwindled and virtually stopped during the Depression of the 1930s.
The newly arrived immigrants of early 20th century America filled the cities with a vigorous labor force. Polyglot tenements were overrun by eager workers, anxious and exploitable. The prosperity of the country had been achieved in large part by their labors. Then, strangely, they became pariahs in their new land.
Well, there were both the fear, which has been a chronic fear, that is a limited number of jobs and immigrants competing for this limited number of economic opportunities. And there was a feeling that America ought to be essentially a North European Protestant country. That's what it had been, that's what had made it great, and therefore bringing in South European, East European, non-whites from Asia and Africa and so on represented another destabilizing influence.
The Ku Klux Klan had originated in the South in the wake of the Civil War. It was always an anti-black movement, but in the 1920s, it had a new mission. Professor Robin Winks of Yale.
In some ways, it was a new organization simply using the old name. And the new Ku Klux Klan was at least as concerned with what they viewed as Bolshevism, with anti-Semitism. They believed that many of the Jewish immigrants were communists, and with opposition to the new Southeastern European immigration. They were also, of course, very anti-Catholic.
In 1925, the Klan flaunted its power by staging a march down Pennsylvania Avenue in the nation's capital. That year, its membership had reached 5 million.
It's generally agreed by historians that the 1920s represented the height of American racism. It's the period in which segregation laws were developed to their most ludicrous in the South. The laws that we associate with making blacks enter different doors of public libraries are all the products of the 1920s. It was a period of time in which the Oriental American was sharply restricted, of course. A period of time in which we were giving virtually no thought to the rights of what today we would think of as Chicano-Americans or Indian Americans. Americans on the whole were fearful that their cherished institutions would be undermined if they had undue contact with the outside world.
With the passage of a single law in 1924, America shut out the rest of the world. The cares of the world seemed far away.